When the time came to choose a first school for William, Charles and Diana opted for Mrs. Minor's in Chepstow Villas, Notting Hill, where Sir John Riddell's youngest son was a pupil. Dressed in clothes he had chosen himself, essential for a good mood, a checked shirt, red shorts and a striped jumper, and accompanied by both parents, William arrived for his first day in September 1985. He was 3 years and 3 months old and went into the lowest year group, which was called Cygnets. No heir to the throne had ever been to school at such a young age. Charles had a governess until shortly before his 8th birthday, and when he went to school he became the first heir ever to have done so. But Diana wanted William to mix with ordinary children from the earliest age and be treated like a normal child. The only difference between him and his classmates that day was that a bank of photographers, reporters and TV cameras were waiting on the pavement outside the school to record this historic moment in the life of the nation's favorite 3-year-old. It was to be their one and only chance. Charles and Diana had written to the editors of every national newspaper asking that William be allowed to come and go in peace thereafter. The exception was the Christmas play. As a friend told Diana's biographer Sarah Bradford, William was in the school play. He was very little, probably 3.5, all dressed up in a little nativity outfit. And there was this huge bank of photographers all on ladders. And everyone was shouting out, "William, William, William." It must have been terrifically difficult for a child that age to understand. I asked her once, "What do you do about that?" And she said she had to say to him, "You are going to go to school today and there's going to be all these people who want to take your picture, and if you are a good boy and you let them, then I'll take you to Thorpe Park next week." Charles and Diana had already done some groundwork with the media. They had held a series of lunches at Kensington Palace and invited the editors one by one. My father, Sir John Junor, then editor of the Sunday Express, was one of them and was duly flattered to have been asked to advise them on public relations. Over plums from the garden at Highgrove, the conversation turned to the catalogue of untrue and hurtful stories that had appeared in the press. As he later wrote in his memoirs, looking slightly tremulous, she poured out to me her resentment about the way in which it was suggested in newspapers that she was influencing her husband and turning him against shooting and hunting. Prince Charles broke in, "I'm angry about that too. Because my wife is doing nothing of the kind. My wife actually likes hunting and shooting. It is I who have turned against it." My father left profoundly smitten by the princess, who kept in touch over the years, recognizing she had a powerful ally. He was not the only man to become putty in her hands. By all accounts, William was quite a handful. Until Harry's arrival he had been the center of his parents' universe, and like most first children who are indulged, as only first children can be, he was not best pleased to be supplanted by a demanding baby who was picked up and fussed over every time he cried. His mother nicknamed him, "Your Royal Naughtiness," but was mostly amused by his cheekiness. At Mrs. Minor's he quickly became, Basher Wills, or, Billy the Basher. His father had been rather cowed and insecure as a small boy and found it hard to make friends. William was the opposite. He was a confident and happy child, not to say irrepressible, and was more than capable of standing up for himself. Staff remembered him being very popular with the other children and for his kindness, sense of fun and quality of thoughtfulness. On a snowy January day in 1987, at the age of 4.5, he moved on to Wetherby School, also in Notting Hill, where he spent the next 3 years in preparation for boarding. His first day, this time dressed in a grey and red uniform, with short trousers, long socks and a cap, was again marked by a melee of media in the street and dozens of clicking cameras. Although not a daily occurrence, they were becoming a familiar part of life, and William, eager to race up the steps to be with his school friends, was frequently tethered by his mother and made to wave or to smile. She always tried to take him to school before her day's engagements, and often stopped off at her local Sainsbury's to buy him and his little brother Twiglets or some other treat on her way home afterwards. "I know they're not good for them," she'd say, "but they do love them." However, most of the childcare fell to Barbara Barnes. She was the constant and consistent figure in their lives, and inevitably a very close bond formed between them. Although the apartment at Kensington Palace was far less formal than any of the other royal residences, the children lived in the nursery and, according to the princess's private secretary, Patrick Jeffson, their domain under the eaves on the top floor was almost a court in its own right. There were bedrooms, bathrooms, playrooms, a kitchen and a dining room. In addition to Barbara, there were part-time nannies, policemen and a shared driver, all of whom operated a routine of school runs, parties, shopping and trips to the cinema. The children didn't always have the run of the house, but usually came downstairs before bedtime. The house was an office as well as a home. Both the prince and princess had meetings and lunches with staff or advisors or charity executives, and it was not unusual for the prince in particular to hold meetings in the evenings. Stephen O'Brien, then chief executive of business in the community, and his colleague Cathy Ashton were sitting in the prince's study waiting for him to arrive one evening when Diana burst through the door. "I'm sorry," she said, "I'm looking for William. It's bedtime so he's vanished. Will you give me a shout if you see him?" They were left wondering how one might give the Princess of Wales a shout, when squeals of laughter from above solved the problem. Roger Singleton, then director of Bernardo's, arrived for lunch one day, bearing a large green plaster frog. It was a gift from a group of physically handicapped children at a school in Taunton that Diana had visited the previous week in her capacity as president. As Singleton was ushered through the front door, William and Harry came bounding down the stairs and instantly began clamoring for the frog. It was too heavy for either of them to carry alone, so William went racing off up the stairs, excitedly yelling to his mother that a frog was coming, while Harry, who refused to be parted from it, staggered up the stairs with one small hand resolutely on the frog's bottom and the other tightly clutching Singleton's free hand. Another visitor who unexpectedly encountered William was Bob Geldof, the habitually disheveled musician and human rights activist. He was at Kensington Palace for a meeting with the prince, when William appeared and, cross that his father was busy, said, "Why do you have to talk to that man?" "Because we have work to do," said his father. "He's all dirty," said William. "Shut up, you horrible boy," said Geldof. "He's got scruffy hair and wet shoes," said William, undeterred. "Don't be rude," said Charles, mortified as only parents of tactless small children can be. "Run along and play. Your hair's scruffy too," said Geldof as a parting shot. "No, it's not," said William. "My mummy brushed it." Geldof doesn't relate whether Diana heard the exchange, but if she did, the chances are she would have found it funny. She was good at providing the love and the hugs for her boys and she enjoyed playing games, but she was sometimes more like a big sister than a mother to them. William's antics made her giggle and she let him see that they did, which undermined any discipline he was getting from anyone else. Yet on other occasions, instead of giggling, she would smack him, which must have sent a confusing message to the child. Barbara Barnes meanwhile was told she must never smack the children and never even raise her voice to them if they misbehaved. If things reached an impasse between the nanny and her charges and they ran to Mummy to complain, as often as not, Diana would side with the boys, thus entirely undermining Barbara's authority. In the absence of any real discipline from Diana, or the Prince of Wales, who was a similarly soft touch, William tended to get his way in most things and inevitably pushed the boundaries further and further. He became so noisy, cheeky and unruly that the Queen, who was a very loving grandmother and normally reticent about interfering in such matters, let it be known that William's behavior was not acceptable. The final straw came when William was a page boy at Prince Andrew's wedding to Sarah Ferguson in 1986. After dragging his cousin Laura Fellows up the aisle, he fidgeted throughout the ceremony, rolled his order of service into a trumpet, scratched his head, covered his face with his fingers, poked his tongue out at Laura, and left the Abbey with his sailor hat wildly askew. He may have been doing what any 4-year-old might, but not many other 4-year-olds were of such public interest. By contrast, Prince Harry was a timid, shy little boy, overshadowed and bossed about by his big brother. But all that soon changed. Harry became the extrovert, the risk-taker, the naughty boy, and William became more circumspect and pensive, his early confidence perhaps less certain.